In the polished world of Hollywood, Ron Howard has always worn the label the nice guy with quiet pride. We know him as the wholesome kid from Mayberry and The Steady, dependable director behind some of cinema's most beloved films. But staying relevant at the top of an industry for over 60 years demands far more than kindness. It requires a thick skin, an iron will, and the wisdom to learn from every collision. Behind Howard's famous smile lies a history of difficult sets, clashing egos, and painful professional lessons. He didn't just witness greatness, he survived it. These are the 6 actors who challenged his patience and showed him Hollywood's sharpest edges. To the millions of Americans who tuned into the Andy Griffith Show during the 1960s, Frances Bavier was a very personification of domestic warmth. As Aunt Bee, she was Mayberry's stabilizing force, a woman whose greatest concerns were the quality of her pickles and the welfare of young Opie. But for the child actor Ron Howard, working alongside Bavier was his first masterclass in the jarring gap between a public persona and a private reality. While the world saw a doting aunt, the cast and crew saw something very different. A classically trained New York stage actress living in a state of perpetual, icy professional disdain. Bavier did not view herself as part of a warm ensemble in a rural comedy. She saw herself as a serious dramatic artist trapped in a medium she considered well beneath her abilities. This created a unique friction on set, not loud or explosive, but quiet, slow-burning coldness that a sensitive child actor like Howard was uniquely vulnerable to. In a show built on communal love, Bavier was an island of professional austerity. She didn't want to be Aunt Bee once the cameras stopped rolling. She wanted to be respected, and the sitcom felt like an insult to her pedigree. Howard has recounted in interviews and in his memoir The Boys that Bavier was not a fan of the playful antics that Andy Griffith and Don Knotts engaged in. While the men were laughing and ad-libbing, she remained rigid and distant. As a child, Howard looked at the adults around him for cues on how to behave. From Griffith, he learned leadership and humor. From Bavier, he learned that the person smiling at you in the script might be the one most likely to ignore you at the craft services table. The tension was more than atmospheric. It was a wall. Bavier was reportedly so offended by the casual atmosphere of the set that she once took a swing at actor Jim Nabors with an umbrella because his singing irritated her. For young Ronnie Howard, this was a confusing introduction to Hollywood's hidden face. He had to perform intimacy with a woman who offered him nothing but polite distance. That experience taught him a lasting directorial lesson. The performance of chemistry is often an act of sheer will, not a reflection of genuine affection. Bavier's story ended in tragedy. She retired to North Carolina, became a recluse, and refused to join the reunions that Howard and Griffith cherished. She was a woman who could never reconcile her talent with her fame. Howard has spoken of her with a mix of pity and respect, acknowledging that her unhappiness made her difficult, but her discipline made her a professional. She was his first encounter with a ghost that Hollywood produces often, the actor haunted by the roles they feel they should have played. If Bavier was a cold breeze in a small town, Yul Brynner was a hurricane in a silk robe. Ron Howard encountered Brynner on the set of 1959 film The Journey at just 5 years old. A tiny red-headed boy thrust into the presence of a man who didn't just play kings, he believed he was one. Brynner, famous for his shaved head and commanding voice in The King and I, carried an aura of absolute power that made no concessions for the presence of a child. Brynner's dominance was a form of psychological intimidation. He moved through every production with rigid, terrifying grace. For a child accustomed to the gentle guidance of his father, Rance Howard, Brynner was an alien force. He didn't speak, he issued decrees. He had a way of looking through people rather than at them, a technique designed to confirm his status as the most important person in any room. In the studio system of the 1950s, stars like Brynner were treated as gods, and he leaned into that divinity with every fiber of his being. Howard watched as seasoned crew members, professionals who had worked on dozens of films, scramble to appease Brynner's every demand. If the lighting wasn't perfect, if a line was fumbled, if the energy on set wasn't exactly to his liking, Brynner's disapproval wasn't a conversation. It was a climate shift. For the young Howard, this was a formative lesson in how a single ego can hijack a collective creative process. It was the very opposite of the collaborative spirit he would later champion as a director. Decades later, when Howard moved behind the camera. The ghost of Yul Brynner likely sat on his shoulder as a reminder of what not to do. Howard's sets became famously relaxed and egalitarian, a direct reaction to the Emperor model he witnessed in his youth. He learned that while fear can produce a powerful performance, it also creates a brittle environment where people are too afraid to innovate. Brynner was ultimately a king without a kingdom, ruling a soundstage with an iron fist, leaving a young Ron Howard to wonder if there was a way to reach the top without losing one's humanity. By 1982, Ron Howard was no longer a child under the thumb of Golden Age icons. He was a young director trying to prove he had the authority to lead a major feature film. The project was Night Shift, a comedy requiring a delicate balance of zany energy and grounded heart. In Shelley Long, he found a brilliant comedienne, but he also encountered what he would later call an analytical anchor. Long came from the rigorous world of Chicago's Second City, a background that emphasized intellectual deconstruction and character motivation, while Michael Keaton was improvising at a mile a minute and Henry Winkler was leaning into his natural warmth. Long was often the brakes on the set. She didn't just want to say the lines. She wanted to understand the molecular structure of why her character would choose those specific words. For Howard, this was a baptism into the world of star management. He wasn't just directing a movie. He was negotiating a daily peace treaty between the schedule and a performer's obsessive perfectionism. The friction wasn't born of malice, but a fundamental mismatch in tempo. Howard, raised in the high-efficiency world of television sitcoms, where time is money, valued momentum, Long viewed the set as a laboratory. She was not a diva in the fur-coated tantrum sense, but she was a perfectionist who could be oblivious to the needs of the ensemble, endlessly asking questions and requesting one more take long after the director was satisfied. Howard had to learn a vital lesson in directorial psychology. The analytical anchor isn't trying to be difficult. They are trying to be safe. For Long, scrutinizing every detail was a shield against failure. But for a director, that shield can become a wall. Howard found himself having to validate her concerns without allowing them to drain the film's energy. It was his first real experience with an actor using intelligence as a form of control. The experience became a turning point. He realized that being a nice guy wasn't enough. He had to be a clear guy. He learned to set firm boundaries with performers who confused process with stalling. And ultimately, he recognized that the friction produced a diamond. Long is undeniably brilliant in Night Shift, bringing a vulnerability to her character that another actress might have missed. The heat nearly melted the machine, but the result was worth it. If Shelley Long's friction was a slow intellectual grind, Russell Crowe was a lightning strike. By the time Howard cast him in A Beautiful Mind, Crowe was already a legend of the mercurial variety, a man whose physical intensity and hair-trigger temperament were as famous as his Oscar-caliber talent. Howard, the perennial seeker of harmony, suddenly found himself directing a performer who believed great art could only be forged in the heat of a high-pressure furnace. Crowe brought a method intensity to the set that often translated into a desire for total creative control. He didn't just play John Nash, he occupied him, and he expected the production to bend to the needs of that occupation. Howard recounted that Crowe would ask what he diplomatically called good, hard questions, polite shorthand for intense, multi-hour debates about a single line of dialogue or the placement of a prop. One of the most famous clashes came when Crowe insisted on filming A Beautiful Mind in chronological order, a logistical nightmare for any production. Howard initially resisted, citing the mosaic nature of filmmaking. But Crowe was relentless, arguing that the psychological deterioration of John Nash couldn't be faked by jumping around the timeline. In a rare move, Howard pivoted. He recognized that Crowe wasn't being difficult for the sake of ego. He was being difficult for the sake of truth. This became the turning point in their working relationship. Howard learned that with a volatile alchemist, you don't fight the fire, you channel it. The psychological toll on Howard was significant, unlike his sets with Tom Hanks or Steve Martin, where the atmosphere was one of light-hearted collaboration. The Crowe sets were heavy with the work. There were days of silence, days of heated debate, and days where the air felt thick with dissatisfaction. Howard had to develop a new kind of directorial skin, one that could absorb the blows of a mercurial leading man without bruising. He learned that some actors don't want a nice director. They want a partner who is equally obsessed. Howard and Crowe emerged as friends and collaborators, but the early battles left marks. Crowe showed Howard that conflict isn't always something to be avoided. Sometimes it is the fuel that powers a masterpiece. While Russell Crowe represented the fire of genius, Tom Sizemore represented a far more tragic form of Hollywood friction, the slow-motion collapse of reliability. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, Sizemore was one of the industry's most sought-after tough guys, a powerhouse performer who could hold his own against giants like Robert De Niro and Tom Hanks. But by the time his path crossed with Howard's broader professional world, Sizemore was becoming the poster child for the liability of vice. His difficulties weren't born of malice or ego. They came from the total abandonment of professional responsibility due to severe substance abuse. Howard's sets are built on a foundation of Midwestern work ethic. Show up early, know your lines, and respect the crew. Sizemore, caught in the grip of addiction, often lived in direct opposition to those values. For a director who views a film set as a sacred collaborative space, that kind of friction is uniquely painful. Not infuriating, but heartbreaking. An actor struggling with addiction creates a vacuum of anxiety on a set. Every day their name appears on the call sheet. The director isn't wondering if the scene will be great. He's wondering if the actor will show up at all. Howard has spoken openly about the sadness of witnessing immense talent being eclipsed by personal demons. He observed Sizemore as part of a larger Hollywood cautionary tale. The actor who has a world at his feet, but is being pulled into the earth by his own shadow. This experience forced Howard to define his own limits. He learned that you cannot kindness someone out of a crisis. He also learned that the greatest good in filmmaking is the protection of the collective effort, even if that means making a hard decision to distance oneself from a talent who is no longer reliable. Through Sizemore, Howard came to understand that the most difficult kind of friction isn't with an actor who fights you. It's with one who isn't there to fight at all.